Let's stay with tariffs. I'm going to talk to an energy expert a bit later on too. There's some announcements that are supposed to be due, but I think they're being buried this side of the election. We'll get into those. But I want to talk tariffs. I also want to look at the latest whack from Elon Musk. It's a cracker. I'll bring in now Sky News business editor Ross Greenwood. Ross, thanks for your time. Just on the tariffs, how do the markets react to this news today?
Look, surprisingly well. That was the interesting part about this, because you have to listen to Donald Trump. It's not by listening to the headlines, and that is tariffs coming for, all aluminium and steel around the world. It's what he also said was that for those who have significant tariffs already on US steel, but where there's fewer tariffs going the other way, that's where he's going to be aggressive. So that is Canada, that is Mexico, that is China. It's not Australia, because we have a free trade deal whereby the tariffs either way are pretty much zero on these products. He said for those who have comparable tariffs, there'll be almost no action against them. This is the reason why, say, BlueScope Steel shares jumped today, because not only does BlueScope Steel not necessarily get affected by the relatively small amount of steel it sends to the United States, but then on top of that, it's got its Ohio plant where it's actually now trying to get into ColourBond in America as a building product, a roofing product, and really from that point of view, it would be protected. So that's why its shares were higher. There were some which were affected. It's the collateral damage that Australia will feel as a result of those tariffs. And that is, if less Chinese steel goes to America, it will find other parts of the world to drop into. And that would include Australia. Already, BlueScope Steel here has sort of anti-dumping allegations against Chinese steel that's coming into Australia. And on top of that also, you've got the prospect that the Whyalla Steel Works could really go out of business. It's got massive debts. It's losing money. It's only recently reopened after 4 months of closure. And then aluminium smelters up the east coast of Australia are barely viable because of the price of energy in this country. So as much as, you might think tariffs have got an impact in this, it really is actually about the settings of the Australian government when it comes to tax policy, industrial relations and energy policy that really makes them uncompetitive.
You are spot on. It is more Chris Bowen in terms of our local industry than it is Donald Trump, even if we were going to have these tariffs hit. And you're all across the detail, because you're right, it's the dumping risk as opposed to the tariff imposition in the first place. I think that's where our attention should have been today. That's why we love you on the show, Ross. Hey, I picked up something that Elon Musk had tweeted out. This is via his Department of Government Efficiency work. They're butting heads with the US Treasury. Now, just last week, a judge blocked Musk and his team for getting the records of Treasury. They wanted to go right through the books. Good on them. That's the way you find the waste and the mismanagement. But he was scathing Musk, who runs a multi-trillion-dollar business, scathing of Treasury's lack of record keeping. He says they're literally paying out billions to people that are on the banned list. Some of them could be foreigners, some of them could be criminals, some of them could be terrorists. He says they're not even meeting basic accounting standards. And there's a rough estimate of at least $50 billion of obvious fraud every single year. And then you get into the arguments about wasted aid money and all that sort of stuff. I mean, other than their own incompetence, Ross, what does Treasury have to hide? Why not show us the books?
Well, that's right. And this tweet, you and I have both seen this, and it really does highlight that in many cases, there is no accountability for where the money is being paid. Now, that might be payments to public servants, payments to departments, a whole range of different things. But if you then, I went one step further with this. He's saying somewhere between $50 and $100 billion a year is unaccounted for. Now, if that's the case, then I started to think, well, hang on, what's the interest bill of America on its vast debt that it's got? And it comes up to the interest bill is $880 billion a year. Now, if you suddenly said, well, we think we could save somewhere between, sort of like maybe an eighth or maybe a 16th of your interest bill on an annual basis, you would take that every day of the week for simple accounting standards.
Yep.
To make certain money is not paid to dead people. And God knows, we've seen that during the Banking Royal Commission and what a scandal that caused. Well, it seems that these are the types of areas that America simply because of lax accounting hasn't kept up with.
And we're not immune here. I mean, the Parliamentary Budget Office says there's a potential $11 billion black hole in Labor's staffing of the bureaucracy. They have grown exponentially public servants. They've added nearly 40,000 public servants to the workforce since Labor were elected. But then if you look at the way they're funding it over the forward estimates, the salaries, there's no accommodation of all these extra people. Now, you say either, get rid of those people, or you're hiding the fact that you should be paying them this $11 billion. Well, what is it?
Yeah, well, that's right. You can't have it both ways. And indeed, you go to Katie Gallagher, who today is saying, well, actually, we think Dutton's going to slash harder or slash more than us, but it's actually in the books. It's written here. And do you wonder why the unemployment rate is sitting at almost generational lows when you've had the federal public service expanded by 36,000 over the course of this government? And that's not to say anything as to what the state Labor governments have done with their own public servants, which is the reason why, of course, those states now are basically awash with massive debts that they won't get rid of over the next 20 years or so. So this is the fundamental problem. And so you sit there and say, well, where is the accountability for every one of those public servants? Katie Gallagher says, well, we've now got a public service that works, it's efficient, that works. But is it really the fact that people have taken up these public service jobs to avoid them being on the unemployment queues? I don't quite understand where Australia is not having
the books.
This conversation about what is the efficient number of people in our public service and why caps are not placed upon them.
You're not wrong, Ross. You need to get a job in Treasury, I tell you what. Run the whole show.